So looking at this worksheet, which is the air quality standards table we looked at last lecture, we can answer some questions about these pollutants. Let's move this down. So what organization monitors and measures the air quality in the United States? Well, we have the good old Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. The units for the standards are in parts per million, ppm, but you also have them as micrograms per meter cubed. So that's these two columns here that are parts per million and microgram per meters cubed. They both are units of concentration. Parts per million are useful for these gases, and microgram per meters cubed is when you introduce the particulate matter. So the standard value represents the level allowed of that air pollutant. So you want that number to be the level, which is a number value. You want that number value, at least if it's monitored by the government, to be a low number, because if the government says, oh, you can have 1,000 of this thing, then there's no purpose in that. So the government has set these standards which will keep us healthy by keeping those numbers low. Okay, so a low value means that this is a highly toxic or high toxicity, because the government is saying you can't have very much of this. Okay, versus a high value that is indicating that it is less toxic. Okay, so the pollutants that are gases are the carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. And what's considered the biggest determinant of air quality any given day is ozone, because this is the most toxic. We looked at this last time, that these are the higher numbers are carbon monoxide. So the higher are less toxic. You can be exposed to more of it. These are the lower numbers. These are more toxic. And so which is the most toxic, which is the lowest number, is this one, which is an annual average of nitrogen dioxide, NO2. Okay, but this is really close to 0.07, okay, which is an 8-hour average. So the reasoning is that, well, they're monitoring this over 8 hours. That's 3 times a day, saying you can only be exposed to this much, which is relatively close to this number for nitrogen dioxide. That's an annual average. So this is more tightly regulated, ozone, and it's basically the lowest number. And so this is why this has the biggest impact on air quality. Okay, low number, tightly regulated, they're watching out for that. So the particulates, PM 2.5 and PM 10, 2.5 and 10 are micrometers. This is the metric prefix micro. Micro is 10 to the minus 6. And a micrometer is 10 to the minus 6 meters. So that's really, really, really small, right? It's got 6 zeros in front of the 1. Okay, and so these are really, really small. We can't see the particulate matter, but 10 micrometer tends to be dust and pollen. You can kind of see that depending on the lighting. And this is 2.5 micrometers tends to be soot, and we can't see that. These are very fine particles. Can't see those, and those are small enough to, from your lungs when they're breathed in, can pass into the bloodstream and accumulate in the bloodstream. And depending on the nature of those particles to start with, like let's say it was a plastic that burned, well then you have some toxic chemicals from that plastic that are in this range of 2.5 if it's PM 2.5. So comparing column 1, looking at the numbers in column 1, these numbers in parts per million, we determined the most toxic would be the ozone. So this was the lowest number and tightly regulated. So the lowest number value and tightly regulated. and that's the 8-hour compared to an annual, the annual average for NO2. And then from column 2 is looking at the concentrations in micrograms per meter cubed, and that included the particulate matter. So again, the lowest number would be the most toxic, and so these two, 35 and 15, are the PM 2.5. So this is particulate matter 2.5, whether you're talking about a daily average or an annual average. It's actually pretty close, and that's because particulate matter doesn't easily flush out of your system. So whether you're exposed to it in 24 hours annually, you'll still have amounts of it there. So, and this is higher than 1 point, or PM10 is higher, which means you can be exposed to more of it. Okay, so the most toxic of when you're including the particulate matter is PM 2.5. And the least toxic is that highest number, the carbon monoxide.